Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Casey Riley, the Curator of Photography and New Media here at the Minneapolis Institute of Art. And it's my pleasure to welcome all of you to MIA's annual Arnold Newman Lecture in Photography and New Media. Above all, I want to express our heartfelt gratitude to the Arnold and Augusta Newman Foundation for their generous support of this series. Thanks to their endowment of the lecture series in 2020, MIA is poised to bring a range of exciting speakers in the field of photographic history to our audiences locally, around the country, and around the globe. I'm particularly delighted to introduce this year's lecturer, photographic artist Dayanita Singh. Born in 1961 and based in New Delhi, Dayanita uses photography to reflect and expand on the ways in which we relate to images. Her recent works, drawn from her extensive photographic oeuvre, are a series of mobile museums that allow her images to be edited, sequenced, archived, and displayed. Stemming from her interest in the archive, the museums present her photographs as interconnected bodies of work that are replete with poetic and narrative possibilities. As many of our local visitors know, and as Molly just reminded us, MIA recently acquired Dayanita's monumental photo sculpture, Potikana, Hindi for archive room, which is now on view in the museum's third floor Perlman Gallery for Photography and will remain until April 2022. In this work, she challenges the perceived limitations of the medium, literally taking photographs off the wall and into modular teakwood structures that can be endlessly stacked and rearranged. In this example of what the artist describes as photo architecture, she documents India's vast bureaucratic government archives, revealing shelf upon shelf of cloth-wrapped stacks of paper, bundles that reflect long-standing cultural practices of preservation and knowledge-keeping. Potikana dramatizes the experience of a secluded archive, inviting viewers to wander among its tower-like structures and find their own places within a boundless universe of knowledge. I'm looking forward into entering such a universe today with Dayanita and to delving into some of the questions she will raise in her talk, Birthing the Photobook, a Matrilineal History. Please welcome Dayanita Singh. Hi, Dayanita.
Thank you so much, Cassie, for inviting me and for hosting Potikana. It's found such a beautiful home. So thanks for that. Of course, we know there are several histories of photography waiting to be explored. And I could imagine somebody writing a history of photography based on Hippolyte Bayard, where with the first photo, he shows us what a live photography is. And it's the first self-portrait. And I'm sure there are several other routes. But for me, my history of photography that I'm going to talk to you about really begins and almost ends with Anna Atkins. And it's because I felt that, yes, Daguerre and Talbot, Daguerre showed us how to fix the image, how to make a photograph. But Anna Atkins really showed us what to do with the image. And more than that, it's the way she thought about the book and this idea of versions. You know, what I hate about photography is this notion of editions that we had to follow. And actually, if only we had looked to what Anna Atkins was suggesting, which is more of an ongoing work, you know, like Potikana. Why should Potikana end when it's acquired by your museum? If I find more pothis, I should be able to send a structure, but then there are problems with registrars, I'm given to understand.
It's a problem.
But, you know, she didn't make just 13 or 17, whatever the number is, editions. She made versions that grew with each volume that she made. And she, in some cases, didn't, or I think maybe in all cases, didn't even bind the books. So she had people interact with the book, with the contents page, and giving them the sequence, but they had to bind it in the way they wanted to. And this idea that a work can grow while you're making it. So there's images keep getting added on as she's going through the different versions. And then she's not selling the work. She is determining who is worthy of that work. And she's making them do some work for it. You know, it's not like a book you get in the mail and you just put it on your bookshelf. You have to bind it. You have to engage with her contents. You have to see what she is suggesting for you to do. And then you can do whatever you like. But she's making a suggestion to you. And I think in some of the suggestions she's making, it's almost like a performance artist giving you instructions, you know, like an artist instructions. And it pains me when I read even The Guardian talking about Anna Atkins as the first woman photographer. And in my history, she's not the first woman photographer. She is the first photographer. She's the mother of photography, and she is the first photographer. And I'm wearing this blue shawl from my mother because it's also got ferns embroidered on it as a tribute to Anna Atkins. And I just heard today that the retrospective that I'm going to have in Berlin next year opens on Anna Atkins' birthday. I mean, what are the chances? 16th of March. Can you believe that?
That's so amazing.
You know, yeah, I just realized that today. And this, of course, is from Mia's own collection. And maybe you can tell us something about, I haven't even spoken about the process, and maybe you can.
Sure. Well, so I don't actually, I thank you for putting me on the spot, but I haven't.
No, I meant at least just introduce this work from your collection.
Absolutely. So as many of our listeners know, Atkins worked with a particular medium called the cyanotype. And the photo paper, without getting into too many specifics, is light sensitive and is treated with actually a form of cyanide. And that's where the blue color comes from. So the treated paper can be, an object can be placed on it, in this case, a New Zealand fern, and then exposed to the light. And after a time, there will be an impression, an image from the sunlight on that treated paper. So, you know, Mia's is a particularly lovely rendering. And one of the things that I love to say about cyanotypes, and I think goes back to what you were saying a little bit about objects growing, or your works growing as you make them. Cyanotypes are one of the few photographic images that can actually regenerate with a little bit of rest time. So if it's been on view for a few months and faded a bit, once it goes into the dark, the colors can regenerate.
Beautiful.
Yes, which is wonderful.
And I thought from Anna Atkins, I would jump to sort of the big inspiration in my life, which is my mother, Dayanita Singh. And my father took this picture of her and hand colored it. So we could say that I was sort of born into photography, you know, with a father who liked to hand color pictures and a mother who liked to make albums. But so that's mother, hand painted by father, photographed by father, and then hand painted. And then when my mother met my father, who was supposed to be a big Casanova, clearly he was, she found a lot of photographs of him with different women dancing in different shelves. And she put them all together in this album, and she wrote on the album, "Girlfriends till he married Noni, hope so. All these photos had been carelessly thrown in a box. Hey, some respect for photography at least. 1960. So that's my father.
She didn't caption any of them or identify any of them.
Actually, some of them have. It's amazing you ask, have incredible captions at the back where she's saying, Oh, that is the Greek ambassador's wife. He should have married her. She would have been happier. I have to scan those. But I just want you to pay attention to this photograph of my father dancing with this lady. It's the same person in both, and it's someone he wanted to marry very much, Pankaj, but because partition had just happened, it was impossible for them to get married. And then more of father with girlfriends.
It really is quite a comprehensive archive.
Yes, exactly. And I've just given you a teeny bit of it. And then on the last page, she puts her photograph and sort of hopes that she is the last. So that's my mother and my father. My mother was an obsessive album maker, but I'll come to that. And I'm just showing you the same lady again, Pankaj. And then I grew up with this photo in my room of Pankaj that my father had hand colored. And somewhere in all the moves, we've lost that photograph, but somehow my mother had made a photo of it. And so that's remained. Mm-hmm. So that's in my room when I was growing up. Here's the picture of Pankaj just lying there always. So I grew up with this beautiful portrait that my father had made of the woman he wanted to marry before my mother, but was unable to. And then in the same room, the same television, Pankaj comes to visit. Right. And Pankaj is staying in our house. And of course, my father has passed on by then. And so this is my room. The house was just, there were albums and pictures everywhere because my mother was really an obsessive album maker. And all photos, you had to do something with them. You didn't just make photos for the sake of making photos. They had to be put on the wall. They had to be put under a table. So these are some of her albums. Lord Netherhope visit Montgomery Farm, 1965, wedding reception of hers. One of my sister Rishma's album, family album, my album. So each child got an album. Father's album, glimpses of the past. And that's a photograph my mother took of her mother when she was 7 years old, when they were still in Pakistan at a picnic. 7 years old. So and then she dressed her mother in her father's clothes. So her mother is wearing her husband's clothes, you know? Did I say that clearly? Mm-hmm. So she dressed her mother in her father's clothes. Then she dressed her sister to look like Vivian Leigh because they had just seen Gone with the Wind. Mm-hmm. Then she dressed me somehow always like Mother Mary. And then sometimes like a Kashmiri girl, a Maharashtrian girl. And my sister somehow was always Queen Victoria. Even when she grew up, she was dressed as Queen Victoria. And this is my first memory because of this photograph. This is me when I was a few months old and my mother went to stay in this beautiful room and she wanted to establish that she had actually lived there. And so she put me on this chaise longue in the middle of the room. I could have rolled over and cracked my head, but she just wanted to take her picture. So everything had to be photographed and then something had to be made with that photograph. This is a photograph when she really set me free and sent me to the National Institute of Design and very proudly says she left her shadow on me, and indeed she did. Mm. So this is the kind of thing we had at home. You know, all the tables were covered with photographs. There's the Vivian Leigh photo, father's girlfriend. So, and they kept changing. So the photos didn't get stuck in one frame. It was like a changing installation everywhere. And new pictures came in, old pictures went out. That's my training in photography. That's what one should do with photographs. You know, you do something with them. And so there were many such tables where there would be photos that we would sit around. So there weren't books necessarily on the table, but there were photos on the table. And that's my room, and full of photographs. This is when I had come back from New York, where I studied at ICP. But, you know, there were these kind of soft boards. And by now my father had passed away, so there were a lot of pictures of him. And then, unfortunately, as soon as my father died, my mother was thrown into terrible litigation, and we sort of lived in quite a hostile environment for many years. And her life was completely taken over by files. And my memory is our living room, which was this beautiful living room before. First, one memory is of father's body leaving that room, and, you know, all the carpets were removed and it was bare. And then when we came back, the very next day, it became a sea of files. And my mother would often sleep in that room because there was so much paperwork she had to try and understand. And, you know, I would go there to give her tea. But that image of that room, this beautiful room that then just had my father's body on a bed of ice and then completely covered with files, somehow that didn't leave me. So that's another kind, and this is how her dining table would look, for example, because there were so many court cases, there was so much litigation. This is her bed, and just the files. You know, in a way, they seem like the albums. And then, you know, she completely freed me and said, just go and do what you need to do and be happy, and don't think about marriage and children, and you don't need to do all of that. And so I took her seriously, and I went to NID, and this is, I guess, after a year of photographing, looking at all my contact sheets. And this will probably be the cover of my retrospective book. And then at a certain point in my career, about 20 years ago, I started to get quite obsessed with archives. And about 10 years ago, got completely obsessed with them. And now I can't shake it off. I've made a book, I've made a museum, I've made all kinds of things, but it doesn't go away. So there's a certain kind of history that comes from a mother being a photographer, the family albums, tables. But then there's another kind of history that gets passed on with, in my case, with files and bureaucracy and litigation. And so this became an obsession. And then at a certain point, I made this file museum. This was 2011. And really, I've learned a lot from spending many, many hours in archives with archivists, most of whom were women, actually. And especially in Dehradun, when I had to go to a very important archive, I took Saramago's book with me. I'm forgetting the title. Oh, how can I? Anyway, and I read out to the archivist the opening page, which describes the smell of the archive between the rose and chrysanthemum. And she laughed at me and she said, Dayanita, you don't have to try to impress me. I know what you're doing. You're building monuments of knowledge. Go ahead. So, and then these archivists also built the archives. You know, it wasn't like there was IKEA or a Godrej even. They called a carpenter and said, this is the room. These are the files. How do we organize it? And I think my structures actually owe a lot to the archivists. So I made File Museum, and which can open and change the architecture of the space. You can also change the images. And this is another way that you can open it. And so, because this is all in response to having now worked, this is 2011, having worked in the world of photography or the art world of photography, and feeling very restricted with the print on the wall, the separation between the print and the book, and this sort of idea of how you show photography, framed print in a mat on the wall, you can't move it. There's no version, there's no ongoingness. And for me, that's photography. My work is really my entire archive, and it'll end when I end. And I try to suggest to people that maybe now, especially being a photographer, is really being an archivist. And you sort of do it for 40 years, and that's the work then. And then how can a museum or a gallery tell me I should only have 30 prints on the wall or 40 prints on the wall, because there's an idea that that's as much people can see, or a publisher can tell me have only 80 images. Photography is vast, and we can't have these little rules for it made constantly. And if you're in doubt, we just have to look to Anna Atkins. And I just wish that we had celebrated her more, and I'm going to do everything that I can to celebrate her. I already have an award called the Anna Atkins Award for the Best Indian Male Photographer, if they can prove to me how their gender shapes their photography, which nobody's been able to do so far. So that's File Museum. And after I made File Museum, I made a book, but somehow I got obsessed with these bundles, with the pothys. So even though, the project was over in the way things are meant to happen, I saw these incredible archives and I had to keep photographing. And these are pothys, these bundles. I never saw what was inside them. And there are hints of color, as you've seen in your Potikana.
Mm-hmm.
And this is how Potikana was installed at Fifth Street Gallery in London, at the Carnegie in Pittsburgh, and now in your museum. And I love that there are all these different heights. And do people sit on the stools?
So far, they seem to be eyeing them. We might have to give some sort of prompt to let people know that they actually
Right. At the Carnegie, I used to just make a center area and we would sit around and, have like a little conference.
That's a nice.
It's a pity museums don't allow you to serve coffee. I would love for these museums to have a little Nespresso machine there.
It would be cozy in this particular gallery too. Thank you so much for that sort of quick walk through some of your work. I know you're not finished, but I wanted to go back just to
yes.
the close-up images that you had from Potikana. I was reflecting on your description of, yes, exactly, your description of your father's passing and finding him, in the home, lying, waiting for cremation. And I've said before to Pujan, and I should have mentioned at the beginning, my wonderful colleague Pujan Gandhi, who's the assistant curator of South and Southeast Asian art here at MIA, and who helped us to acquire Potikana. We've often looked at those bundles and thought about how there's kind of a question when you look at them close up, whether is it a morgue when you see them on shelves, or is it a nursery? And because there is something about the gentle, you don't see it with this image, but there are pinks and blues that come through with some of the color photographs that are interspersed into Potikana. Yes, like this. And so there's a strange sort of consonance and disconnect. Are these about life? Are they about death? Are they about keeping? Are they about releasing?
Yeah.
And what you just said about your family and your memory is an extremely powerful way to think through these spaces and the experience of being in these photo architectural spaces that you create. But I also wanted to ask, I guess, when you say that you're obsessed with the bundles, what about them? Was it that connection to your father and your mother's connections, your mother's grappling with the archive in the aftermath of his death, or was there something in particular about you as a photographer walking into these spaces and thinking about the archives and what they held that sparked that interest?
I think I was very obviously affected by father's body being in the room, and then the room becoming full of files, and my mother having to sleep in that room because there was just so much, and her going to court. And she used to carry bundles like this because it's much easier to carry files if you make a bundle of them, so she had her own color coding system. And because my mother is such a character, she finds sort of her own way of archiving things. So she would go to the Sikh temple and buy the square cloths that Sikh boys put on their heads, and she would type different files. So if it had to do with the farm, they would be in green. If it had to do with the litigation, they would be in black bundles. So she had her own system with bundles. And she's talked about it in the book as well, how it makes it so much easier to carry because it becomes like a bag as well. But I'm also I've photographed a lot of bodies in my Go Away Closer, not bodies, people sleeping like bundles. And yes, there is definitely a much deeper connection with these bundles than just bureaucracy or just paper. I don't like to, today, I don't know, I didn't plan it like this. I don't know how it became so personal. I don't like to talk about this because then that again becomes a way of pigeonholing it, but I know, and that's why I can't stop. I'm still photographing archives, and people say, please, Dayanita, we can't, how many archives? And I say, I can't help it. It's probably something I'll do all my life. So yeah, there's a deep connection there. And I'm not entirely sure what all is in it, but I can't resist it. There's another work, Time Measures, which we don't have time to show, but if I come to Minneapolis, I would love to do a projection of it.
Wonderful.
Which is just these red bundles that have faded with time. But the knots, each knot is a portrait. So there's the history that comes through the medium. And then there's this history that comes in your genes. I was born into photography, but then files became so much a part of our lives that it's just not such a surprise that I've ended up, maybe by the time I go, half my archive will be full of archives. And I love making an archive of everything. My structures, in fact, started because I wanted to make an archive of all my saris for this room, So I made a card to place all my saris. So what was the point of them being in my cupboard? They're such beautiful textiles. It would be nice to have them in the living room. But then I don't know, that I sort of can't keep up with myself at most times. This urge to archive this is something I think I got from my mother. Everything is labeled and everything is put into little clusters, and she doesn't like to throw any boxes because any box could be as a potential archive, no?
Exactly. But it also strikes me that, and I want to remind everyone who's listening, that you titled this a matrilineal history. And of course, that's a nod to Atkins. But of course, it's also, if I may use your mom's first name, to Noni's interventions within the medium. And it strikes me that one thing that you and I have talked about in the past is the innovative nature of Atkins, the ways in which she grasped photographic circulation as a tool, as something that could become not only a personal form of connection, but also an assertion of her authority and her knowledge. And it strikes me that your mother, in her own way, with all of this bevy of beautiful ladies, was also asserting some order and control in that universe. And it's a bold move to display all of your partner's past lovers or love interests around the house, but it's also a way of claiming them and making that pattern, those relationships, make sense. So it's interesting. I'm not surprised that you are obsessed with the bundles and what they contain, because if they have so many stories and potential, they can only amplify the things that your photographic interventions can.
I also think that, thankfully all the India shows hopefully are over by now, but for a while it was very fashionable to have Indian art, Indian photography. And I don't think those shows help anyone except the museums raise funding for the exhibitions. So that's fortunately has, I think, stopped now. Maybe India's not so much in fashion, but the great show, the great Indian show of photography, there are two or three, but one of them is definitely the family album. And
Mm.
whatever I have seen of people, and especially when the women are making the album, because the men might
Mhm.
have bought the camera in those days,
Mhm.
or photo. So in my family also, my father would photograph the monument, the temples, the monuments, the landscape. If he went to travel in the West, then he would take pictures there. My mother photographed at home, and she photographed. She didn't photograph me as Mother Mary because she hoped I would be like Mother Mary, but because she was excited that I was like her doll and she could dress me in these different ways. And
Mhm.
so every departure was delayed by her image making because she wanted a record of it. Everything had to be recorded and
Mm.
then had to be made into something. So for
Mhm.
me, the art world and later photography was a bit of a, oh, really? Is this what you do with photography? You just keep taking photos aimlessly? And
Mm.
there's also the economics of it, no?
Mhm.
Because you have a roll of film, 12 exposures, you want it to last for a month.
Mhm.
And then she used to give her film to a lab, and they used to decide what to print.
Really?
So yeah. So she would think something's wrong with the camera because there's so many images she would have taken that she didn't get prints of. It's
Mhm.
only when I made contact sheets in the late 90s or the middle 90s of all her work that I realized what an amazing photographer she is.
Mm. Indeed. Yeah.
Um, so the great history of photography may be everywhere, but certainly in India is in the family albums.
Mhm.
And if I could, that's the museum I would make, a museum of the family albums. And there is a project in Bombay that Anusha Yadav runs called the Memory Project, where she
Mhm.
tries to collect all these family images and little stories that go with them. But the physical albums would be so amazing, no?
Mhm. And not to jump ahead, but I think you're about to talk a little bit about some of your Pothi boxes. And I wonder
Yes.
if you could speak as you're going through that about some of your interest in the, I don't want to call it the democratization of the medium, but making photography accessible again, making it something that, I mean, you talk about it a lot in terms of play, but I think there's also something that's refreshingly horizontal from an economic perspective and from an aesthetic perspective in your approach to the medium.
Mhm.
You want people to have you want people to be able to access the
Oh,
material.
absolutely. Absolutely. The image is just one part of photography. Photography is dissemination,
Hmm.
photography is dispersing the image.
Yes.
Making the image is just the starting point, it's just the raw material. I, I try to say this again and again, but I'm not able to explain this to people. It's not about the image. That's just the starting point. Literally, it is the raw material, whether it's raw vegetables or it's notes in a symphony or it's
Right.
words in a poem. You don't become a poet because you have a collection of 50 beautiful words. So my training is you have to do something with it. You have to make it more than those images. Um, this is the file room book,
Hmm.
which I made in 2013. And when I was invited to be in the German pavilion at the Venice Biennale, I sort of sneaked the books in because, at that time, people were not comfortable with the idea of books being on the wall, especially of the Biennale, because exhibition was exhibition and book was book. And that was not the case for me, because for me, the book came first. And so this is what I did. So you went into the German pavilion and you walked through Ai Weiwei's massive chair sculpture, and then you see these books on the wall. But many people thought, oh, this Indian photographer, she just likes to put her photos on colored fabric. But actually, it was the same book. And what I did was, oh, I don't know what happened to that file. Just outside the German pavilion, I convinced the Prince Claus Foundation to bring my book cart from India. And they managed to convince Oakwe to release the file room book, which you could then buy for 30 euros. So before you went into the German pavilion, you could buy the book, have it stamped and signed from me. I'm there with my book cart. My sari says, go away closer, because at that time, that was my favorite work. Oakwe had just released the book. You know, you don't get better than that. And then you go into the pavilion and you see the books. And this is, for example, in the Kyoto Museum of Modern Art, and they were doing a show on Marcel Brothaer, and they wanted to show my work, and they didn't have any money left for the budget. The budget was finished for shipping, etc. So I said, oh, no problem. Just call Steidl, buy 72 books. There are 70 images in the book. Cut up 2 books and paste them on the covers, because I made it the same size. So you can do exactly that. Cut up 1 book and put the image on the cover. So they had to get 2 books. And that's what they did. I had to, of course, sign a release form giving them permission to do that. But now it's in their collection. You know, it's a work. So at that time, it was, now it's, when I say the book is the work, people are like, yeah. But in those days, nobody was letting me do all this. I had to sort of, and I love the idea that people could actually walk away, could buy one of these book objects. By that time, I had made this wooden structure into which you could slip the book. And this is a show in Varanasi at the Kriti Gallery, where I had shown my silver prints in a very similar hang. And I just wanted people to, I don't think anybody was so bothered, but I was. I wanted people to understand that for me, the offset print was as beautiful as the silver print. And in fact, my digital prints I don't like as much as I like my offset. And that's why I call myself an offset artist. So a file room book museum was made, and file room book objects were made, and then they were put on the wall. And the same at the Queen's Museum in New York. And then it sort of became like, well, if you want my work, this is the work right now. I'm sorry, nothing else is available. So if you want my work, you have to put the books on the wall. And so by that time, I had a little bit of say in these matters. And so I was able to push the book onto museum walls. And Jaipur Literary Festival, this is when they invited me to release the file room book with Jeff Dyer. And that was great because I hugely admire Jeff Dyer. But they said, Dayanita, please don't bring your cart, because I used to take my cart around the art fair and things. They said, we have, you know, this is a literary festival, security hazard. We don't want your cart. So I said, oh, I'll just bring a bag. And that's what I did, that little leather bag there. I made this accordion fold, and it was heavy. I carried it onto stage. And then the release was just opening the bag and pulling out this accordion, and the whole hall went, because suddenly there was an exhibition there, you know, from them telling me you can't bring your book cart. So every problem always leads to a great solution, because somehow I don't let myself get bogged down by the rules of photography. And, you know, National Museum invites me, and what do? I make a book museum of my mother's book and my file room book. And that's sent a letter in the vitrines at the back. And then at the art fair, I'm invited to do something. Here's my file room book cart, and here's my file room and mother's book museum. And then at the back, I have this little signing table, because there's a whole ritual. You can't just buy the book. You have to sit on that stool. I have to sign it, and then I have to tie it in this cloth for you. So there's a lot of, there's this wonderful word called mahal. You know, how do you create a mahal for the book to be sold? How do you create a mahal for your work to be viewed? How do you create those circumstances, that atmosphere, that none of these words do justice to mahal, but it's really about creating the mahal. And I feel these structures do that as well, because then you're suddenly realizing that, no, this is not the kind of photography I've been thinking about. And then, of course, at a certain point, I got, you know, I work with the greatest publisher, Steidl, but, you know, he takes his time. And of course, nobody can print a book exactly when I want it. And so I made my own publishing house, and it's called Spontaneous Books, because it's spontaneous, as in when I feel like a wooden structure. These wooden structures are made. Each one has 30 image cards in it.
Mm-hmm.
And this is, as it happens, Potikana, the Poti box,
Mm-hmm.
because by that time Potikana had gone to Carnegie, and I knew that it's a work that would get acquired. And even if it didn't get acquired, it's out of the reach of people. You know, you couldn't live with it in your house. Like, however much you like my work, you couldn't have Potikana in your house, but you can certainly have Poti box. And because it's a box with image cards and it's not bound, and Anna Atkins did that. So I don't know why the boys are telling me it's not a book because it's not bound. It's bound by the wooden structure. But this
Mm-hmm.
is big arguments happen about this fact that what she does is
Mm-hmm.
not quite books. Um,
Mm-hmm.
anyway, so this is Poti box, and each one was sort of gift wrapped by me in a very precise knot, and the fabric on it says Poti box, and it's yeah. So it was, and this will be part of my retrospective, just all bundled up like that. So it's back to the Poti, it's back to the bundle, and that's it really. That's what I wanted to show you. And this is a show I had in New York, my
Mm-hmm.
best show ever at the Callicoon Gallery, because without realizing, I had made a retrospective of all my book objects, including the 9-pocket jacket and the file room bookcase, signing table for Museum of Chance, and Potikana. And if I come to New York, you know, I might carry a little suitcase with me and we might set up a table and 30 people have the opportunity to acquire the box.
I love that. And I assume the bags that I'm seeing on the shelves, those black shelves, are your the ones that you devised for the book festival. Is that correct?
Exactly. So
Yes.
that's the file room bookcase.
Yes. And actually, didn't you tell me that your furniture maker is also the person who makes the furniture for your home? So the
Yes, yes, I know them because they used to make the furniture for our house, and they were just here today. We were shipping for Berlin.
uh-huh. Yeah, well, so I only bring that up because I was thinking as you were talking through this last sequence about um, how how often you return to the domestic as the locus for your attentions. And
Yes.
I don't know Mohol, but I was thinking about intimacy when you were talking and thinking about how um, the efforts that you have engaged in recent years have really been about a return to that 19th century album experience of having it in your lap or having it in the parlor and turning it and having it at a scale that can be shared with someone who might be sitting next to you, but not, you know, taking over the entire room. So I love that. I love that part of this is about, yes, it's about like a haptic sensibility, it's about the sensual experience of the paper and the scent of the photographic chemicals, but it's also about connecting with the person you love. It's about being in a room with them and perceiving together.
And the domestic has been very, very important. The scale of my museums, for example, it has to go through my front door. And it doesn't matter how high the ceilings in your museum are. Uh, it has to just, it has to work in my house because I should be able to live with it. So I've
Mm-hmm.
lived with all the museums that are now in the company of other museums,
Mm-hmm.
but they've lived here. The domestic is very important to me. I've
Mm-hmm.
never been someone who's wanted to have a studio outside.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you know, whether it's going to, like, to make the 9-pocket jacket, I could have worn that as well. You know,
Mm-hmm.
umpteen trips to Anita Arora to try and get the pockets right. And you know, when I sit, it should be like this. And because I want to wear it on a flight, I might want to show someone my exhibition on a plane. You know, it could happen. I also sometimes wear it on the street in Venice and just stand there and show my book to anybody who wants to see. Some people think I'm doing pizza delivery kind of thing. They're not interested. But
I love it.
yeah, I think the house and my house, my space over here, is very important to my work.
Mm-hmm.
The scale of it, the skills of it, you know?
The skills of it. I
Uh,
love that. The scale and
yeah,
the skill.
yeah. The
Mhm.
scale and the skills are very important. So just now, because we are having shipping problems, and I was talking to them and they said, the only way to resolve this problem is to, if you can construct your work in another country, like somewhere in Europe. And
Mhm.
I said, I couldn't do that. It has to happen here in my veranda, in my house, in my uh, upstairs, that it has to be this domestic thing going on. And because accidents
Mhm.
happen, and through those accidents, new forms happen. And Potikana, as you know, is everyone sees it like a pillar, but because you've installed it, you know that it's packs flat. And that's only because I
Yes.
live with the work and I understand how problematic it is to ship a vertical column, that I found a way to break it up. That's not going to happen if I have to send a drawing to a master cabinet
Mhm.
maker or anyone, anywhere, whether it's Japan or somewhere in Europe. It has to be in
Well,
the home.
right. And I think too, it's a way of domesticating an institution and making
Oh,
of
yes.
a familial connection to those who are caretaking the objects you make. Uh,
Mhm.
when Poojan and I, we didn't physically unpack the boxes, but we were present as the art handlers were taking them out and thinking about them, and seeing the surprise and delight on their faces as they unfolded things, because it's an intimidating thing to get all of these boxes at first. They didn't know what was inside of them. And once they realized it takes about 10 minutes to just, it's like, putting together, I don't know,
Lego.
a folding chair. It's just, it's
Yeah.
there. And then you
Yeah.
get to play. But where I'm going with this is that I think, um, in making, these sculptures in this way with your photography, you're also inviting others into your circle.
Yes.
We are part of the, now we're part of that, extended network of people who have, been in your life, seen things through your lens, and we get to play too, and that's quite generous. That's not something that every curator gets to experience, or even every museum goer gets to experience. So,
Yeah, I don't think of it, especially when it happens in your house. For me, it's not generous, it's a privilege.
yeah.
It's I don't know how to say this, but of course it's a privilege to have Potikana in Mia's collection. Of course, that goes without saying. But to know that Poti box lives in your house and that from time to time you change the image in it.
Yes.
And I'm sure, Cassie, when you see the next box, you'll be very tempted to have it because if you have two, you can play even more. And that, to be in someone's home, is the ultimate thing for me, I must say. I
Mm-hmm.
know people will say, oh, now that you're in all the museums, you can say that. Well, precisely. I am in all the museums,
Mm-hmm.
not in all, but in a lot of museums.
Mm-hmm.
But and that's wonderful, and I'm very grateful for that because the work gets looked after, and basically I planted all my archives in these institutions, no.
Yes.
So Potikana is in your institution,
Mm-hmm.
but there is something about the home and being in your house that is the true privilege of the art that I make,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes.
because I'm not a print on your wall, I'm not a book in your bookshelf.
Mm-hmm.
I'm this structure,
Mm-hmm.
where I'm alive. My artwork is alive in your house, or you have the Museum Bhavan box and you're opening it out and changing the exhibition. That's the great privilege of my work.
I love how you just articulated that. And, I'm realizing that we have a number of, students today in our audience, and, um, the Arnold and Augusta Newman Foundation is particularly, supportive of, when you come to Minneapolis. We would very much like you to speak with some students, here. But in the meantime, I wonder if you have any, thoughts to offer to students who are maybe thinking along similarly, uh, you know, Maybe it's not being recognized as innovative. Maybe they're going against the grain within their practice. And if you have any advice or perspective to offer in terms of you've talked to me before about going up, against the big boys and having to fight to get things off the wall and into people's hands. I wonder if you have any thoughts or encouragement to offer to students who might be working in this way.
Yeah, of course. I mean, if you believe in something, then you really have to, what is it? Put your money where your mouth is. Is that how you say it?
Yes.
You have to stand by it. Nobody else is going to tell you this is great. Because if they're telling you it's great, it means they've seen it before. They recognize something. But when you're proposing something and everybody is going, I don't think so, just do your exhibition. What is this book thing all the time? Then you know that, I mean, you have to stand by it, no?
Yes.
And
Yes.
so I would say only do those things that you're going to stand by, regardless of what anybody says.
Mm-hmm.
In my case, I have, of course, a mother who's very supportive of being innovative. She's always encouraging thinking out of the box. But I've also had a friend like Mona who lived out of the box.
Mm-hmm.
And I think to somehow just have the courage to fall on your face if necessary, but to really follow through and not let people talk you out of it. But if there are students here that are thinking about photography in particular, then I would say to them to really think about this idea of the photographer as the archivist and understand that it takes time, that it could be 30 years, 40 years, 50 years. And then that is the work.
Yes.
So the work, the books and the exhibitions are like little commas and full stops in that.
Right.
But the work is the archive. And I hope there will be photographers that, in all this, there's now too much photography in the world and all of that. But still, that sort of consistently going after the things that you are obsessed with. Yeah. So my suggestion to them would be to only do what you're really obsessed with. And that takes time to find, to work out what is it that you're obsessed. And then you have to stick to it and you have to fight for it. And, if there are boys in your department or in your field, then you have to, I mean, in my case, I think it worked to my advantage that my male colleagues didn't take me seriously. So I just sort of went ahead and did whatever I wanted to do. And they're very fond of me and sweet and indulgent and all that. But, the best was one of them asked me, they said, Dayanita, you are traveling so much in the world. Do you think you could introduce us to someone who's really worked with the book, who's making forms out of the book? And I started laughing and I said, that's a good joke. And he said, no, I'm serious because you talk so much about the book. I thought you might know somebody. And I thought, my God, you don't hear me. You just don't hear me,
Amazing.
So,
well, Dayanita, I can't believe an hour has gone by. It feels like
really already
15 minutes.
Oh no,
I know, but it's time. So I just want to thank you for bringing Potikana here, for speaking to us today. And I don't know, I'm grateful to know you, and I'm looking forward to many plots together ahead.
absolutely. We have to do lots of things together. We have too many connections with.
We do. Here's to Matrilineal Histories. And thank you so much. Thank you so much.
And really think about working with the family album in this region. It's amazing. Or maybe there's a young PhD student wondering what to work on. And that's what I would say to them. Just look at the family album and look at the matrimonial photos. There's a great work to be done there as well.
Oh, yes, indeed.
Photography is so exciting. There's so much to do.
I know. That's a great gift when you don't let anybody tell you what you shouldn't be interested in.
Exactly.
Well,
Thank
again,
you, Cassie.
Thank you so much, and especially so late in the evening where you are. And many thanks to our audience for attending this talk today. And Dayanita, we'll be in touch soon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you, Cassie.
Bye bye.
Thanks, Molly.
Thank you, Molly.
Bye.